Stuff out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our session today, ASCE Texas Section Vice President for Technical Affairs, Ron Reichert.
Well, thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. Beautiful day today. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. This is, as you know, since you signed up for it, this is part 3 of Corporate Caffeine. Stop sabotaging your success. I want to thank any branches that are hosting groups. And, you know, Texas Section ASCE, we are the state section for civil engineers. Continuing education is one of our top priorities for engineers. And one of the most important parts of continuing education is our ability to learn how to communicate better so that our voices as engineers are heard both locally, but also at the state and national levels on very important things such as infrastructure funding and infrastructure bills. We need more engineers involved, and learning how to communicate is key to all of that. So Ameritex Pipe is very proud to have sponsored all 3 parts of this series. Dacia is a friend of ours. She's helped us out tremendously in multiple ways. And she is our presenter once again today. She is the CEO of the Marketing Blender, which is a leading authority on accelerating growth. Dacia is the host of Corporate Caffeine Podcast, a fractional chief marketing officer, and the CEO of the Marketing Blender, which is a business-to-business sales and marketing alignment agency. She is a member of the Forbes Agency Council and a Forbes contributor, and was also named an American Advertising Federation Shooting Star. In addition to her client work, she writes and speaks on how people can use their work and words to unleash their potential and change the world. And she also just published a book, which is very exciting. So Dacia, thank you again for providing this service to our members. I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Ron, and welcome everybody. I am extremely passionate about communication in our busy world. And so I get very excited, especially when I get to speak with individuals who really do have communication challenges. And I don't mean personally, I mean, in your real world, in the responsibilities that are on your shoulders, you're in a complicated communication environment. Number one, it's very complex. There are so many different types of stakeholders, internal, external, secondary, tertiary, as well as anybody in business development. In addition, you are the arbiter of really complicated knowledge. I mean, the initials after the end of your name, the amount of education that you had to go to, the amount of education you need to continue and maintain, you have a lot of knowledge in your head and in your hands that it's your responsibility to distribute. And that makes it a very complicated communication environment. Now, I hope I'm giving you guys a little bit of a chuckle on this slide, because I can tell you, even though communication is central to my professional career and what I teach on, I have felt like this so many times, you know, like sticking my foot in my mouth or thinking, oh my gosh, does this ever get easier? So today, out of the 3 that we've talked about, today is probably the most practical. Now, if you guys have been to the previous ones, I'm very practical. I want you to be able to do something different that is still central and natural to who you are, but that makes you more potent. So the previous ones, we talked about messaging choreography, how to say the right thing and in the right order, very important for how the brain processes information. The second one, we talked about personal brand, so finding your authentic approach. But today is really about the do's and don'ts of everyday communication and what's going on. Now, first of all, really straightforward, there's 2 aspects of all everyday communication: content and delivery. Content is what you need to say, and delivery is how you communicate it. And guess what, you guys? We all tell on ourselves, and we really do. I mean, you know, it's those little card shark type of things that people pay attention to. If any of you watch the World Series of Poker or anything like that, they're called tells for a reason, because we do tell on ourselves all the time. And sometimes we tell something wonderful, and sometimes we tell something not so wonderful. Now, spoiler alert, at the risk of giving everything away and you guys just wanting to be like, okay, got it, that's all I needed, here's the short and the long of telling something wonderful instead of telling something frustrating. The only time we tell something frustrating is when we are more concerned about what we're thinking about ourselves and what other people are thinking about us and about our own outcomes than we are about the audience. Dangerous tells, sabotaging tells come from focusing on yourself and not on your audience. And so that's the great thing, is that the fundamental truths about powerful communication lead with servant leadership. It's about you caring more about your audience and transforming their journey than being inside of your own head. So it's simple to say, sometimes difficult to do, but just always go back to that. So spoiler alert, I figure I'd get to the heart of it really quickly so that you have that context behind you. So content and delivery. Now, the good news is for you guys, especially since I'm not an engineer, is that we are not going to dive too much into content. Why? Because you have spent your entire education, your entire careers having lots of details of content. You guys should be great at this. So it's not so much that you're not saying the right thing, it's how you're saying it and it's in what order. Also, not only are you gifting people with the content, the knowledge that you have, actually your tells are a gift as well. So this is something that I want to make sure that you guys are being aware of in regards to a really common area of sabotage for people. And it's that we get paranoid about being judged. And so we give away our power and we say, oh, they're perceiving me wrong, or they're judging me wrong, or they think this about me. But that's not true, you guys. Everything you do is giving a small gift to someone to cue them what to believe about you. You are in control of this, and you just have to be intentional about it. So be very, very careful about being paranoid about how you're being judged, because you're the one that is gifting people with something so that they can better understand you. So those semantics can be incredibly, incredibly important. Now, if you've seen me talk before, you've heard that this is one of my favorite quotes, and not because it's a good one, it's because it's a frustrating one, but it's a great reminder. George Bernard Shaw said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And we have all been there. We had a long conversation with a peer, with a boss, with a team, with a kid, with a spouse, and you're like, okay, we're on the same page. And then a week later, things move forward, and what comes back to you is something over off in left field that you had no intention of communicating, and it was completely contrary. And so the focus on this, and why I use this quote so frequently, is that communication is a two-way street, and understanding is the other piece that we need to be focusing on. So again, be careful about you thinking that it's a one-way street and that people are judging you, but also it's what kind of judge do you think people are? Now, we all have to judge decisions. We have to judge situations, scenarios, information that's coming our way. And there's different types. And so you're going to bring assumptions and you're going to tell on yourself around those assumptions. Which judge do you think is in the audience? If you automatically assume that the 10 judge is in the audience and that they are seeking to understand and that you are on their side, it is going to dramatically change your performance, simply because your assumptions will come through. But if you are always assuming that people are out to get you, you will tell on yourselves, and people will perceive that, and it will make them nervous about your competency. And it's because you're thinking about yourself. So being understood versus creating understanding. If you are focused on the recipient and on their understanding, you being understood will come naturally, because that has to happen, and it will engage the other person. So we've talked about this before, but it is a really, really important information. A lot of times we think about who are we competing against, right? There might be somebody in the room that wants the job that you do, or somebody in the room, metaphorical room, digital room, sales room, career room, right? But somebody in the room who is also vying for the thing that you are vying for. But here's the most important information in regards to business communication, the person that you are most competing with, number one is yourself, and number two is the listener, because we are being inundated with information every single day. There is a war on attention, and our brains filter out 11 million bits of information per second, you guys, per second. So you have to be very effective in your communication simply to break through the war on attention so that people can give you their understanding, so that they can engage with what you're saying, because their own brains are so loud and their phones are always on and there are always pings. And especially in Zoom, for those of you answering email right now, stop it, please invest in yourself. But there is so much going on, so many brands surrounding you at all times, that this is your real communication competition when you are trying to get something across. So making sure that you are thinking about what you are really up against, and then putting that person who has a war on their attention at the center of your communication is incredibly impactful. So as a reminder, if we're filtering out 11 million bits of information, what in heaven's name gets in if we are keeping all of that out? Well, only something that we already cared about. So you might be thinking, wait, I'm talking to people in the political spectrum or in the community or architects or building owners or, bosses or anyone. They don't naturally care about what I'm saying. They have different priorities. That's true, but there is alignment, and it's your job to find the alignment. And the alignment comes from understanding the scenario that's in their head. How do they see their world? What do they currently care about? And even to the point, use the same words that they use. So validate, you have a lot going on in your world. There are a lot of competing priorities. And that's why I'm going to take very, very intentional progress to make sure that the information that I give you is right on point and aligned with what you need in order to make progress. And even just communicating your intention around bringing high value and speaking to them about them can change things very, very quickly. So on the content side, always start with what they care about resonance. And it's about the order in which you present that. So as a reminder, if you guys did not see the messaging choreography webinar, and even if you did, it's always good to have a little bit of repetition and healthy redundancy, right? But the first thing is, contrary to what you have probably been taught about communication, you always want to mirror what people believe about their world and validate that you understand where they're coming from and that you understand what role this decision or this information plays in their world. Specialization is not about specializing in engineering. Specialization is about specializing in the people that you are meant to serve. People, resonance comes from, they get me, they understand me, they hear me, and they're speaking to what I care about. Specialization is specializing in people and in their specific scenarios and problems, not in your education. Your education and your engineering knowledge, guys, I hate to say this, it's table stakes, because all of you know this, all of you are incredibly smart, and you had to go through that content piece in order to get a seat at the table. Now you have a seat at the table, and now you have to go up the sophistication ladder in regards to how you communicate. And now your specialization is about other people. So always mirror and seek to teach them something so that you can frame their decision in a way that brings maximum value and helps them make a good decision. After that, you provide data and stories based on what they care about and based on what their curiosity is in order to validate the teaching that you just gave them. And then they will get naturally curious about you, and they'll say, who are you again? Okay, tell me about your firm. Okay, why is nobody else saying this? And it's because when you walk in servant leadership, you are contrary to the standard war on attention that is happening in 2022. And it immediately differentiates you in action. You don't have to be razzle dazzle. I would never encourage sizzle over steak. right? You simply have to care about other people and then do it in the way that you facilitate and steward your communication. So communication and decision-making happens in the limbic system of the brain, and the limbic system of the brain is in control of emotion. And I'm sorry for all of you analytical and detail-oriented people out there, this is really, really important. And so when I'm talking about emotion, I'm not talking about crying while you're giving a PowerPoint presentation or, having playing your little mini violin. What I'm talking about is simply asking yourself in preparation, what's the decision behind the decision? If you're trying to convince them or influence them or impact them in some sort of way, how does this impact their career? How does this impact their reputation or their legacy? How does this impact their firm? So it means you've got to think through, what are their goals as a human? What are their challenges as a human? And what impact does that decision have on how they see themselves and what they do? This is the emotion behind business to business communication. So it's not ooey gooey cheesy emotion. It's the real communication that makes this, our type of communication in the business world very, very complex, because it's the hidden emotion, but it is the driver behind who they trust and who they decide to listen to. So reason and data is important, but I need you to understand it is secondary to emotion. The brain uses reasoning and logic as confirmation bias. It will wrap logic around the subconscious decision based on emotion and context that the brain made. So that's why when we're going back to messaging choreography, mirroring and relevance and resonance is most important. Teaching them something that makes them curious and potentially even skeptical so that they're leaning into your information is engaging their brain and helping them to move forward in their decision-making. And then you teach and prove and communicate why you know what you know at the end, because that's where the confirmation bias, that's where the reasoning and the logic plays. Unfortunately, because you guys have so much data and so much analytical knowledge and natural orientation towards that, you want to start there, but that is not of service to people because that's not where the brain starts. And so you simply have to let their needs dictate the order of your communication. The other thing to understand about why placing and having a little bit of discipline around your analytical knowledge and just slowing that down is important is because the more complicated a decision, the more cognitive load that happens in the brain. And when there's cognitive load, the brain does these really crazy things in order to create shortcuts. And that can hurt you if you're not aware of that. So they are called heuristics. The brain will take a shortcut. All of a sudden, subconsciously, it'll say there's a lot of cognitive load happen, and it will default to familiarity, right? What name have they heard before? Or social proof, who have other people used? Or recency, who was the last person to talk to me? What was the last bit of information? Was the last thing I heard on the news? The brain will start to default to things that in its day-to-day life are very helpful in navigating too much information. But when these heuristics come to play in really big, really complicated decisions, especially if you have a unique and new point of view, or your firm does, you have got to be aware that you've got to slow your overwhelming communication down so that they can take it bit by bit and piece by piece, so that cognitive load does not undo all of the knowledge that you're trying to partake or trying to communicate. So remember, their understanding is more important than what you are trying to communicate. And sometimes you have to slow down in order to speed up so that people take the correct pathway and not a shortcut that could actually hurt them. So we just want to make sure that we are not solving the wrong problem. When you are communicating, when you are talking, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about email or networking or presentations or Zoom or text or anything in the business realm, you want to make sure that you're not solving the wrong problem. And again, it's not about being understood. It's about creating understanding, because it's not about you. Your impact comes because your ability to transform their problem into progress, their problem into progress. So that takes us over back to the tells and back to the other side of the equation. So from a content standpoint, trust yourself, allow yourself the discipline and the preparation to put your complex information in the correct order so that there is a servant leadership heart in the technical complexities of the content that you are delivering. But then there's the delivery, right? And for a lot of detail-oriented people, a lot of engineering communities that I've spoken to, this is the part that people go, oh, I hate this part, right? Because this is where the judging comes up, where all of a sudden our insecurities, no matter how much we know, no matter how hard we've worked, this is the part where the lizard brain just starts to sneak up. But again, if you keep servant leadership at the heart, you are going to be fine. And again, spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you to be somebody that you're not. That will never work. People's BS meters are so on high nowadays because we have so much communication and so much marketing swirling around us all the time. People can smell it a mile away. So in regards to delivery and servant leadership, and so we're going to get into some really specifics in just a second, but what happens for you guys is oftentimes people are drowning and they simply need a life preserver. Throw me something so that I don't go underwater, right? But what you guys want to do is before tossing out the life preserver, you want to explain the foam, you want to explain the density, you want to explain the weight distribution and all of the language that I'm sure I am totally butchering, and hopefully on silent, you guys are laughing your butts off because you should be. But people are like, I don't care. I just need a solution. I just need a solution. So don't give people what they don't want. It's not a gift if you do. Make sure that you are remembering that the outcome is what actually matters, not how and why it happens. They will communicate to you when they need that depth of detail, and it is appropriate sometimes, but it's not appropriate for everybody, and not everybody needs that in order to give you a yes. So if people are willing to say yes to you, let them say yes. Don't give them 10 more hours of analytical information. If people are ready to say yes, let them say yes as soon as they are ready. But you have to be oriented and paying attention to what they need and when they're ready to move forward in order to do that. So always be focused on what the outcome, their outcome is, and whether or not you are helping to facilitate that. So be careful. We all talk too much. I know in this slide, I'm saying you talk too much, but it's because you is collective. We all talk too much. And guess what happens when we talk too much? Or actually not what happens. What happens is we all turn into Charlie Brown, wah, 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 or Charlie Brown's teachers. What happens is when we talk too much, and this is one of the common tells, you guys, we talk too much when we are nervous and when we are trying to prove that we know what we're talking about. When we trigger, when that proof in our own brain starts to trigger, it means we're no longer reading the room. And now we're only listening to ourselves and being overwhelmed with making sure we're understood and that we're not judged negatively. And we've lost the ability to put the audience first. So be very, very careful about talking too much. And remember, when you start to feel fatigued that you've been talking too much, it's a tell, a good one for yourself to go, oh, maybe it's a check-in time. And you can simply say, hey, I've been giving you a lot of information. Is this what you need? Or, where are you at? And what have you heard me say? Or anything. And these are the kind of things that you should practice, but try to start being aware of your own tells so that they can help you navigate and better read a room and better serve other people. Okay, so I had promised you that we would get very, very practical and very, very specific. So we talked about content. It's more about the order of your delivery than what you're saying. And then we've talked about delivery, and this is really where we do the deep dive into delivery. So we are going to talk about written communication, verbal communication, and digital. Now, in this war on attention world, they kind of overlap. And so we're going to be picking up some pieces based on how you use the tools. So first things first, we are going to start with visual communication. Now, you guys are probably like, wait, You didn't list that on the slide before. That's right, because this is one that we have a tendency to forget, but it's implied, it's omnipresent. It is the one thing you cannot ignore and you should never opt out on, is the visual aspect of communication. The eyes take in information 60,000 times faster than the written word. 60,000 times faster. They are the gatekeepers to our attention. And so if you ignore this piece, it is to your detriment. So all of you guys have seen that when you're watching a live presentation, there's tons of words on the slide. Are you listening to the person or are you reading? You're reading. You know why? Because it's visual and it's hard to focus on multiple things, and you will pick the thing that you have the most control over. So as a presenter, and when I say presenter, I mean writer of the email, tapper of the text, giver of the PowerPoint, person on the phone, whatever presentation channel you're in, make sure the visual is on point and intentional. So from a presentation standpoint, nail your opening and your ending. They are the only two things people will remember. So I suggest making sure that it is visual, right? Make sure that when you pick images, they have to do with the emotional servant leadership side, the decision behind the decision, the emotion behind the outcome. Pick images where people go, that's me. That's how I feel. You remember the first image I showed you guys? Kind of funny, right? Maybe how you guys feel sometimes. Pick smart images to open and close your presentation, not words, and don't be obvious. Have some fun. Let your personality shine. And it doesn't matter what your personality is. Just tell the truth about it. Just go where you go and people will follow as long as you are in confidence and servant leadership. Second, slides must be visual. Hopefully you guys have seen this in my presentation. Now, I intentionally did these bullet pointed because so you can screenshot or so that you can use these as takeaways, but you will see by the end of this presentation, I only have a small handful number of those because I want to trigger the emotion and the intention behind this. So I have very few of these. Also, slides should be visual because it will force you to not use your slides as a crutch. If the words on the slide are so that you can remember what to say, you need to be doing some more presentation. So make sure your slides are visual. Take complicated information off the screen. So for instance, if I was in person with you guys, this would be a handout. I would have a workbook and I would give you the workbook. And on this page, it would have an image and it would say page 4. And so I would allow you guys to open and I would make sure that I'm facilitating in a proper way so that I'm a partner in your participation. But if you have complicated information, take it off the screen and be in control of it. Use pictures. Show, don't tell, show, don't tell, show, don't tell, right? Go back to kindergarten. It is the best form of communication. There is a reason why teachers are able to navigate hordes of cats and squirrels running amok. It's because they know to show instead of tell. Prepare. You can't walk in compassion and servant leadership if you did not think about the people that need to understand and what's in it for them. This takes preparation. And this, guys, is probably the hardest thing I'm going to challenge you to do because we are so busy. We are drowning in busyness, but your busyness is stealing your potential. Your busyness is stealing your impact and your influence. Carve out 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, do whatever. If you are driving to a live presentation, speak it out loud, prep the questions, ask yourself out loud questions about what are the people that you're going to communicate with, what do they care about and who are they and where does this live in their life? So prepare. Okay, this one, smile. And I have a little bit of homework for you. Pay attention to how much you see smiles this week. Spoiler alert again, it's not as much as you think. And it's awful. And you will be shocked once you start paying attention to smiling and smiling intentionally at other people. Go smile at people. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to be a small talker. Just smile. Just, and it doesn't have to be this big toothy grin if that's not your style. Just like a little nod, like walking down the street. Smile. You'll be shocked at people's response, and you will be shocked at how infrequent there are smiles. So when you are communicating, smile, because guess what? Your lizard brain will prevent that smile. It's not good. It is dangerous. Smile. It's okay. Side note, we can hear smiles. Scientists aren't 100% sure why that's true. So when you're talking on the phone, smile. When you're leaving a voicemail, smile. When you're in person, smile. This is also nonverbal communication. Very, very important. And then the last one, if this makes you uncomfortable, it's probably because it needs to. Be intentional in your physical choices. I don't mean be perfect. I don't mean look like everyone else. I don't mean blend into the sea of sameness. And I don't mean be cultural versus countercultural, whichever side of that you want to land on. What I mean is be intentional, be you. There are certain things that simply communicate disrespect, right? If you are slovenly, it communicates disrespect. It's not about your haircut. It's not about your facial symmetry. It's not about whether or not you have something designer on, but be thoughtful. Think about, and especially for you guys that went back through that went through the personal brand piece, think about the adjectives and the character values that you hold dear and how you want to be perceived, what gifts you want to give people, and then simply make physical choices that align with that. It's that simple. It's about being in control and gifting people things about yourself so you don't create misunderstanding. Visual, the eyes process information 60,000 times faster. That's why I'm telling you to smile. And that's why I'm telling you to simply be thoughtful and gift people the truth about you. Don't unravel it on accident because of your paranoia or your insecurities. And we all do. I've done this so many times. Just be thoughtful. Okay. So make sure what's in it for me. Always lead with that when you're thinking about your decision. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame because it's not about you. Okay. The other thing, so this is from a visual standpoint, it's from a content standpoint, it's from a delivery standpoint, and that means it's a segue. But this is really, really important, you guys. When I said earlier to nail your opening and to nail your closing, the thing that's implied in that is you have to make a decision about what's the one thing that if they don't remember anything else, they remember that. Now, this one thing in a perfect world will trigger the memory of other things, right? So it's not that they won't remember anything, but there needs to be one central anchoring theme. Mine is servant leadership and mirroring. No matter what you're looking at, I'm always coming back to that so that you remember it. Now, you will remember specific details depending on your personality, depending on your preferences, depending on what emotions I triggered in you. But there's always one thing, and you have to pre-decide. You don't have to be explicit in saying what the one thing is, but you do have to be intentional to make sure that that through line does not get lost on your audience, whether you're in one-to-one communication or one-to-many communication. What's the one thing, and use it as your central guiding principle. Okay, so moving more into the segue of other types of communication, other tells, if you will. No pain, no change. Most people will not make a change. They will not change their mind, change their landscape, exchange money, change their point of view, even change their seat unless they are uncomfortable. So that's where the emotion comes into play, is that decision, what's behind it, and what are they calling it? Is this a money decision? Is this a time decision? Is this a risk decision? These are the three most common pain groupings in the business world around what is causing their desire for a change, or it's rarely a desire for a change, it's a willingness to change. So what is at stake for them? And it's typically around these three things. When you're trying to choose visuals and you're trying to choose a central theme, you probably want to make sure that it's aligned with their one thing, right? So you need to understand what's the pain that is creating a willingness to change. Okay, so story. The reason that I'm bringing up story at this point, and if you guys have been in my other webinars, you may or may not be sick of this part, and that is okay. Story is related to memory. Story is visual. It creates mental pictures in our brain, and story is emotional and orderly and logical. That's why it's so impactful. That's why I never, ever skip this part. So the number one thing about story is that it's a transformation. It's about the person that you're talking to or someone similar to them, a similar hero type of character, and the problem that they were facing and the journey that they went on and the happily ever after that they achieved. A story is always about transformation and change so that they can see it. Now, when you are communicating, use as much specificity as possible. This is who this person was. This is what they felt. This is what their day-to-day was like. This is why it was so dangerous to them. This is why it created so much stress. And after they solved this problem, this is why they were blissful. This is what they were now able to achieve. This is how they had changed. These are all the things that were returned to them. This is how they had grown. This is how it felt to be different. That is a transformation story, right? So use specificity. We all hear about elevator pitches, and I've got a whole soapbox on that we do not have time for. But I will tell you, for my money, every time I would choose a 2.5 minute story over a 10-second elevator pitch every time. Because guess what? If you're telling a story, people will give you 2.5 minutes. If you're given a value proposition, they will only give you 9 seconds. I don't know. Which one would you prefer? I'd prefer 2.5 minutes, and I'd prefer a scenario that is memorable and piques curiosity and connection. And that's what story does. So always make sure to include a story for yourself. All right, let's get into some other specific areas of possible challenge for most of us. Let's talk about email. So email, I keep asking my children, I've got a 20-year-old and 3 18-year-old boys, and I keep asking them, will one of you guys please innovate so that you can blow up email forever and rid the planet of the toxic, painful, time-stealing communication channel that is email? But until they do that, we're stuck with it, right? And so email is one of those places where you really, really need to bring in your intentionality, and you need to think about that other person. So let's go through a couple of basics. Let me see if I have them listed on the next screen. Okay, good, I do. So mirror. In your subject line and in your very first sentence, talk to them about what they care about. So here's a weird piece of advice that I'm going to give you in order to do that. Do not use a nicety in your first sentence. Do not say, hi, so-and-so, I hope you had a great day. How was your weekend? Unless they are a pal of yours, kill that communication and move it to the end, because it does not serve them. And here's what I mean. When people are going through their phone at the line in the bank, do any of you guys that even still going through the bank? Probably showing my age. You know what we're doing when we're bored? Swipe. We're looking through email in order to what? Delete, swipe left on it, delete, delete, delete. And how are we doing that? We're looking at the recipient. We're looking at the subject line. We're looking at, especially if you have Outlook, the first part of the first sentence. If it's like, hey, so-and-so, golly gee willikers, I hope you're good. The person's like, I don't have time for this. And they will either skip it, and especially if they clicked unread, that's bad because it's just going to get lost in the black hole of email hell. Right? So make sure that you're being thoughtful about this. Subject lines, use a good subject line. If it is tactical and they are expecting that email, make sure that is exactly clear. If you have an action item in there, sometimes I'll even put 2-minute response requested, or 30-minute meeting request, or something like that, or review of whatever specifications or thing that you are asking them to review. I'll be crystal clear so that they can then appropriately organize it. Because sometimes you get an email and that email does need 15 minutes or 30 minutes, right? And so if they know, then they can take an appropriate action with that just from your subject line. So the other thing is, remember, this sounds weird, but email is actually visual. So remember how we're scanning really quickly, delete, delete, delete. The other thing is, so when somebody goes, oh, I know the sender, I get the subject line, I'm ready to handle it, and the first line is what I care about, then they're looking at the email. And you know what they're looking for? And they don't even realize this. If it's a long email, oh, I don't have time for this. So if you're sending an email that has 4 or 5 paragraphs, you're probably in the wrong place. That is probably a phone call, you guys, or a Zoom call. 4 and 5 email paragraphs should never, ever, 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 ever be an email. You can do something called bombs or other video communication in email. People will listen to a 4-minute video sometimes, but they won't read 4 paragraphs of information. And if they even try, you know what they're going to do? They're going to read the first paragraph, then they're going to reply to the first paragraph, and they're skipping the rest. And later you're going to go, I sent them that email. Did they not read it? No, they didn't, because you sent them 4 paragraphs and they didn't have time. So use bullet points so it's easy to scan. Thoughtfully highlight things, as long as it isn't the equivalent of yelling via email, right? So if it's appropriate culturally, organizationally, you can bold but use spaces so that the eyes can see what's important. Only have one call to action. And if it is getting long, you shouldn't have written and wasted all that time. You should have hopped on a call. So think about being in a different place, and do this in every single follow-up, every single one. Email is a time and attention stealer. So don't let it steal your time and attention, forcing you to rewrite things 20, 30 times, because maybe it wasn't supposed to be an email the first time, or you could have just simplified it. Okay, Zoom. Why do you think I picked this picture for Zoom? Doesn't really make sense, does it? I mean, Zoom, after all, we're showing our faces, or are we? Okay, how many of you guys turn off your cameras on Zoom so that you can, with guiltless abandon, check email and not pay attention to the call? Danger, 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 danger. First of all, it's rude. Second of all, unless you have certain level of clout in your firm and in that meeting, you are 100% visible. You might as well not be there. Do you know what kind of a career killer turning your camera off is? It's insane. And guess what? People go on high alert when their camera is off because they have to. They no longer can use their eyes to make judgments. They have to use a much less efficient processing method, their hearing, in order to think through what's happening. They know they're missing something when people aren't, and they automatically assume there's something wrong that you have your camera off. So either they're making assumptions about what you're doing and why your camera is off or where you are, or they're making assumptions about themselves and why you don't care enough to give them the simple human respect and connection of turning your camera on and simply showing our face. We are human. The brain likes faces. The brain likes people. By default, no matter how technologically comfortable you are, our brain does not trust technology and screens. Make sure you're turning your camera on. So that was definitely one of my soapboxes, but man, every time, especially if it's a younger person on the call, I just want to be like, you're killing your career. Turn your doggone camera on. So shocker, first bullet point on this slide, cameras on. Multiple speakers. This is frequently happening in regards to big group meetings. Make sure that you're facilitating and you're paying attention to who has spoken, who has not. Make sure you are communicating. If there's not an opportunity to pipe in, go ahead and send a chat so that people know that you're there. Raise your hand. Use the tools inside of Zoom that just help people navigate the really painful digital communication that this is. Ask questions early and often, especially if you are the ones trying to create influence in that. Make sure that you're checking in, make sure that everybody's heard you. How are you doing? On Zoom, we often have to talk a lot because we can't read people in real time. And so make sure that you're creating some space to do that. Set expectations and keep it short. This goes back to the prepare piece, you guys. Have an agenda. Stick to the agenda. When you have an agenda, if you have a 45-minute call, think to yourself, oh, there's 5 things on that call. 45 minutes divided by 9 is 5 minutes a piece. And on top of that, people are going to weigh in. You'll be so surprised that in a 45-minute conversation, you might actually have to keep each of your 5 topics to 2 minutes each in order to make sure that you're facilitating appropriately. But this back-to-back thing where people have to run to the restroom at 12:59 in order to make their 1 p.m. call is ludicrous. So don't do that to them if you have an opportunity to lead the call and facilitate. If you are a team leader or if you are a facilitator, find ways to play. If you guys want ideas, please DM me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email. But there are so many cool, smart adult ways to play. First of all, start with smiling. It's amazing, but there are a lot of clever, interesting things that you can do without being different than who you are. It's just about allowing your humanity to intentionally come through Zoom. And so that one of your goals should be building connection. If you have big groups, push them out into breakout rooms, learn that functionality on your Zoom, especially if you are a leader, you should be using this. If you want people to take action, put them in breakout rooms. Also ask tons of questions. You know why? If you are calling on people right now, like if I was to call out Ron, he'd be like, whoa. So if he was checking email, he's going to learn really quickly in the call, do not check email because somebody might call on me. So if you need engagement, make sure that you're being thoughtful by engaging people early so that you're warning them this is not the one that you can log out and, and mentally check out on. So there we go. It all comes back to servant leadership. So when we move over to networking, we need a new word for that. Ugh. Networking just has bad connotation. But at the end of the day, networking, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's in person, I know that's not everywhere. I mean, here in Texas, we are blessed that we get to do that a little bit more than other people, but it hasn't fully come back. But networking is simply about making a connection with another person and being curious as to how can you help them. So what should you, well, let me give you the easiest, fastest, best way to just crush networking for the rest of your life and never, ever, ever be uncomfortable again if you can remember these. Smile. Listen. Make sure that we were intentional in our physical choices. But here's the thing to make sure networking is never uncomfortable ever again for you. Every single exchange simply end on a question. Hi, so-and-so, how are you doing? I'm doing great. Now, here's a little pro detail. Never say I'm doing great. Say, I had an interesting day today. Such and such happened. How about you? Or change the question. Has that ever happened to you? Or have a couple pre-planned questions. So how are you doing? Fine. How was your week? It was great. Have a few pre-planned questions. Some of the safe ones, are you going on vacation this year? If we are close to a holiday, how was your Mother's Day? Or did you get a chance to see your mom this weekend? Or if they have kids, do you guys get to enjoy that? Please avoid talking about the weather. But there are some really interesting, and you guys are engineers, you guys should be great at this part. Have a couple questions that make people go, huh. And where they have to give you a real answer. So for instance, what's the most interesting thing that happened to you this week? People will go, you know what? I met blah, blah, blah. And then all you have to do is be curious, listen, smile, and ask another question. Burden lifted, no problem. By you being the best listener in the room, it will by default make you the most interesting person in the room because you were the only one taking the time to validate them, validate their existence, and actually be human. So always end on a question. But most importantly, and I know this sounds weird, find your voice. And when I say find your voice, I simply mean show up with heart and servant leadership. It's not about what you say. It's not about how brilliant you are. It's about having a point of view that are centered around creating transformation for other people. Go back to the homework I gave you on the personal branding. let the people that love you tell you how you naturally serve others, and then believe them and think about ways that you can be more intentional in that and simply show up as you, because nobody else can be you. No one else in the history of the world, in the future, in the past, in the present, has your same gifts, personality, family, point of view, experiences, failures, successes, interests, giftings, skills, education, etc., etc., etc. No one will ever be you. So that means if you don't, you're leaving a huge gap in the world. You don't need to be anybody else but you. You would never go into an auto parts store and shop for lingerie. Why? Because auto parts stores don't offer lingerie. So you don't expect them to. You're not disappointed and mad at them. It's the same thing with human beings. If you are a natural introvert, which means you're a deep listener, you're curious, you're thoughtful, you don't need to be this charismatic, razzle dazzle person. You simply need to be you. And no one is going to expect that you do that, because they wouldn't shop for lingerie in an auto parts store, and they're not going to ask you for something that you cannot give, as long as you tell the truth about what you give and who you are, and that you do it intentionally. People only need you to be you, because your potential, your ability, your goals, your dreams, your everything in this world is unleashed because of your ability to transform the lives of others. How you change others is where you find your calling, where you find your legacy, where you find your success, where you find your joy, and where you find your potential. It's not about you. So if you want to learn more, if you want to join a community that is about servant leadership and being good to one another and practical advice about how to do that, we've got a podcast, and you can connect with me personally. That's what the QR code is on the corporate caffeine side. Also, we have live free trainings. If anybody's in DFW, we will be live streaming these eventually. So you can sign up for those. And we do deep dives on LinkedIn and social selling and networking and SEO and all sorts of things. So both organizational and individual, all around communication, no charge. This is about creating a like-minded community of people trying to make impact in the world. So that's how you can connect with me and a whole bunch of other really smart people that I surround myself with, and that are here to help be of service to you. So thank you guys so much. I went a little bit over, but we still do have time for Q&A. So Ron and Ameritex, thank you so much for allowing me to present these and just to communicate with this absolutely amazing crowd that's so important to our state and our country going into the future.
Well, we're glad to do it. It is important, Dacia, and we appreciate what you're bringing to us. It's part of those skills they don't teach us in school, and we really need to learn it. It's rather important. So we do have an interesting question, and it's one I kind of have a question about, also about the cameras being turned on and off. And if you could just clarify. So Jeremy made a statement. He says he hears what you're saying about the cameras during Zoom or virtual meeting. He doesn't agree it's a career killer. The use of webcams is relatively new, mostly driven by need during the pandemic. Some people in our organization don't have cameras for the computers, therefore they can't turn them on. Other times, I find cameras turned on can be incredibly distracting when there are 20, 30 or more people attending a meeting and the cameras are left on. He thinks it comes down to knowing your audience and the purpose of the meeting, and agrees there are times when cameras should be turned on, particularly for small meetings, groups, or one-on-one. Can you clarify that? I kind of thought, yeah, when we're presenting to 150 people, everybody with their cameras on can be very distracting. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about one-on-ones or smaller group meetings?
I am talking about it all. So for instance, if it's a one-way communication like this webinar mostly is, except for these couple of minutes, then that's great. But what I know automatically, and why I try to engage and do a whole bunch of different things, is people are checking their email. They are doing other things. By nature, busy, hungry, aggressive, overwhelmed people are trying to multitask, and our brains are not wired for multitasking. So unfortunately, I think cameras off auto defaults to giving people permission to not participate. So I respectfully do disagree. And, if you go back like to a really old saying, out of sight, out of mind, it's just true. If people have not seen your face in a long time. So the distractions, I mean, like this is one way where Zoom backgrounds can be really, really helpful. So, having a unified Zoom background on a large team call can be really helpful because then you only see the people, you don't see anything crazy happening in the background. People not having video cameras, I do think it's something leadership needs to think on. One of the dangers, of course, and we've all had it. So I don't want to say if you have a network issue where you have your camera off that, you're doomed. But if in general, your camera's off because you have terrible Wi-Fi, out of sight, out of mind. I mean, you are invisible and that is not healthy. I have facilitated 100 and 200 person groups with cameras on where it was a requirement and we use breakouts. We never ever keep sessions longer than 15 minutes. We do games, we do all sorts of stuff. And I mean, quick, fast things that are incredibly engaging. And in that situation, what you want to do is you want as quickly as possible turn the responsibility back over to the audience, push them into breakout rooms so that they can work and get things done and engage with the communication. And so thinking from a presentation standpoint about smaller chunks of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, reminding yourself that the people that you're communicating with are very smart and very capable. And so then turning it back over to them and letting small group discussions police and help one another, accomplish what they need to is probably what I recommend. So from a leadership standpoint, companies do need to do better about arming their people with what they need in order to make sure they are on camera. But from a presenter standpoint, this is the new normal, and the hybrid workplace is not going to go away. And we don't want to hurt the people that are working remote and accidentally overemphasize the people that are in person or on camera because it will happen.
And so like having a background of an ice sculpture, is that acceptable? Or
I definitely think it's acceptable and it protects you from anything crazy happening behind you, so nobody's accidentally going to walk in your background or anything like that, right, even if that's right, possible. So it can be helpful, but I love the ice sculpture. You're great at your backgrounds, Ron.
Well, thank you. So I don't see any other questions or comments in the chat or questions. So if nobody else has anything, Dacia, again, this has been fantastic. I'm glad we were able to put this together. I hope everyone who attended got something out of this. I know I did, and you've already critiqued me multiple times, and I still pick things up. So thank you again. Just so you know, if you attended, as Mike said at the beginning, you will be receiving your continuing education. And wait a second, we got a question pop up. Yay, let me get it. Oh, can the slides be shared?
Definitely, absolutely.
Okay.
So I'll provide a link to you, Ron, and then you can share, share them as you see fit. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So again, thank you. And again, it was our pleasure as Ameritex Pipe to bring this to everyone free. It's important. We're involved with helping develop our engineering community because the only way Texas moves forward is if manufacturers and engineers and contractors all work together. And the only way we can work together is if we can communicate with each other. So thank you again. And for those who are on here, you've got information to listen in more and learn more from Dacia, and go check out her book. And with that, Mike, I'm going to throw it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Ron. Thanks once again to Dacia and all of our attendees for joining us today. Looks like we were right at 1 o'clock, so I will shut down the session now. Please enjoy the rest of your day.